everyone, and it's great to be back in Melbourne. I am based in London, but I did manage a game at the Etihad Stadium, not the MCG, unfortunately, to watch the Mighty Magpies win a pretty scrappy game against St Kilda. But it's good to see Collingwood win. It's good also to welcome so many people from around the region. Last night I met a new friend, Eddie, from Solomon Islands, and if you've not been to Solomon Islands yet, please do so. It's a great place for scuba diving. For our Indonesian friends, I flew here on Garuda. Great service, great airline, great shout out. And there's an internal auditor in Garuda going, how much did we pay for that shout out? An internal auditor at my speaking agency saying we didn't ask for a payment for the shout out. So I don't quite know how that's going to go down. For the Koreans, I always like visiting your country, and I've had the very interesting experience of being on both sides of the DMZ. So I'm watching with great care and attention what's happening on the peninsula now. And I hope we actually do get a secured peace rather than some sort of alternative that I wouldn't like. And because we have so many people from different parts of the region here today, we have got simultaneous translating going on, and I'll look up at the booth at the back. It's a very difficult job to do simultaneous translating, particularly if you've got an enthusiastic speaker who starts to speak too fast. So I've said to the translators, if I speak too fast, please say into the microphone, put your hand up to tell them to slow down. So those of you who are listening on the simultaneous translation, if the translators ask you to put your hand up, please put your hand up and tell me to slow down. But let's get to the substance of what I want to talk about today, because expanding possibilities, if you've got to understand the context of the world that we're sitting in now to look at what the possibilities are and where they can expand. And you've got to be ready for that change. But unfortunately, as a species, human beings are not very good at seeing or anticipating change. It was law here in Victoria for a man, and it had to be a man, to wave a red flag in front of an automobile so the horses didn't get scared until 2002. Can you believe that was technically the law? It took that long to actually change it. We're not, as a species, very good at all at seeing and accepting change. We often run from it. And what change are we going through today? Well, my culture, the white Anglo-Saxon Christian European culture, is particularly bad at seeing change because we call the years 400 to 1400 the Dark Ages. And we said in that period the world went backwards. But it didn't. Only our culture went backwards. The Romans left London and Europe went backwards. Think about it this way. You're auditors, you know numbers. So let me ask you this question. What was the Roman numeral for the number 0? Anyone? They didn't have one. Which means the person who invented or perfected the number 0 is a very important person in our history, because how do you have our counting, money and auditing system without the number 0? And maybe we can say, oh, it was the Muslims who invented it, or it was somewhere in Arabia, or maybe it was in India. But who was it? What's the name of the person? And it says a lot about our culture that we don't know that person on the left, Muhammad al-Khwarizmi. The anglicisation of his name turned into algebra. And he perfected the use of the number 0 in his mathematical university outside Kiev in Uzbekistan around about the year 790, 800. But we don't know his name because that great advance happened outside of our culture, and we're very bad at accepting it because it wasn't our culture that did this. Likewise, most people who came from the European Anglo-Saxon education tradition believe that Galileo found the world was round. The problem with that narrative, 200 years before Galileo, this guy on the right, Mirza Ulugh, found the world was round, not flat. And not only that, measured the length of the year to the most accurate point until computers were invented. But how many of you knew Muhammad al-Khwarizmi and Mirza Ulugh before right now? And Mirza Ulugh's observatory was outside Samarkand in Uzbekistan. Hang on, why this mathematical university in Uzbekistan in about the year 800, and this observatory about the year 1200, also in Uzbekistan. The world was going backwards, wasn't it? And the answer is no, only our culture. Other parts of the world, Arabia, India, Islamic communities, moving massively forwards. And we didn't see, accept, or recognise that change for nearly 1,000 years. We had in our culture the arrogance to think the Silk Road was discovered by Marco Polo in around the year 1200. Actually, the first European to write about the Silk Road was Emperor Augustus in 1 BC. There was this enormous trade going down for 1,200 years between Africa, Central Asia and China before the Europeans even realised it. Pizza was invented in China, so was spaghetti, but don't tell the Italians. In a similar way, because we're seeing things through our time frame and our culture, we show graphs like this. 1980 today, economic growth in the United States versus economic growth in China, and we say China is rising. What a great change to see so many people coming out of poverty. But let me give you a very different narrative. China's not rising. China is returning. Because if we take this graph back to the year 0, when Augustus wrote about the Silk Road, we actually see all the way to about 1700, China and India dominated the global commerce, global GDP and global trade. They came radically down until about 1960 and have started ticking up. So in some ways, you can say China is not rising, India is not rising. They are returning. It's a very important and different narrative to accept what's happening. That in fact, white Anglo-Saxon Christian dominance is the spike, not the norm. You could say that we're going back to norm. Now, what actually changed here? What actually were the big turning points around about 1820 and about 1950, 1960? Because we need to actually understand this current change even better to understand the opportunities and the possibilities that come in the future. Before the 1800s, individual productivity around the world, something I hope a lot of you measure, was more or less the same. The vast majority of people were subsistence farmers with a small ruling class and a small trading class. In other words, there was a direct link between your population size and your economic size. Big population, big economy, small population, small economy, simple. But what happened around about 1800 with the Industrial Revolution is that white Anglo-Saxon Christians just got lucky that we invented the steam engine and the cotton ginny. And that funded the age of exploration, the age of empire. But what it actually did was knock the synchronisation between population size and economic size out of whack. What the Industrial Revolution did was massively increase individual productivity in the Western cultures, which meant you could now have a small population and a big economy like Belgium. What we now see today, from about 1960 onwards, is we took all that information about individual productivity and shared it. Call centres in the Philippines, IT hubs in India, factories in China. Where we are today, actually, is there's no longer a comparative advantage in knowledge. It's all about implementation of knowledge. So actually, today, India and China are not rising. I would say India and China are not even returning. What's happening today is the world is returning to sync, where your population size and your economic size are coming back to alignment just as it always was. We are leaving the historical spike and returning back to norm. And the great challenge for the white Anglo-Saxon Christian cultures is to see how are we going to adapt as the world returns to Asian dominance, returns to Asia-Pacific dominance. It's going to be really interesting. And what are the possibilities that come from that? Because I call the period of time that we're going through now the sixth great human transition. And the sixth great human transitions are these. Egyptians to Greeks, Greeks to Romans, Romans to Zoroastrians, Zoroastrians to Muslims, Muslims to Christians, Christians to Chinese.